with applications from city centre, as well as the largest and most significant applications this council receives. The aim of the panel is to hear all the relevant information from applicants, members of the public, council officers, to help members of the panel make their decisions. Could I now invite members and officers to introduce themselves and mute your microphones once you have done so? If I start on my left, please, Daljit.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Daljit Singh. I lead the City Centre planning team.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Brannan, Principal Engineer Highways.
Good afternoon, Tim Hart, City Centre planning team.
Good afternoon, Councillor Caroline Gruen. I represent Bramley and Stanningley.
Good afternoon, Councillor Karen Renshaw representing Alzey and Robin Hood.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Councillor Annie Maloney. I represent Beeston and Holbeck Ward.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Neil Warshaw, heading Lane Hyde Park Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Eleanor Thompson, Guiseley and Rawdon Ward, and substituting today.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Calverley and Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor David Blackburn, Farnley and Wortley Ward.
Good afternoon, everybody. Councillor Dan Cohen, Woodley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Paul Wadsworth, representing Guiseley and Rawdon.
Hello, everyone. Councillor Colin Campbell.
Good afternoon, Stephen Varley, Design Officer.
Good afternoon, Andy Booth, Clerk to the panel.
Hello, Nikki Dio, Legal Advisor to this panel today.
Good afternoon, David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer for Leeds.
Good afternoon, Jonathan Carr, Head of Development Management.
Thank you for that and welcome. Can I move on to agenda item number 1 then? Andy, please.
Thank you, Chair. Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item number 2, we have no items which require the exclusion of the press and public. Under item number 3, we have no late items of business today. Moving on to agenda item number 4, could I ask members if they've got any interest to declare? No. Moving on to agenda item number 5, we've got apologies from Councillors Brooks, Garthwaite and Khan. And we have Councillors Renshaw, Thompson and Walshaw in attendance as substitutes today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andy, and thank you for our substitutes today. Councillor Renshaw, Councillor Walshaw, was another one, Andy?
Councillor Thompson.
Councillor
Thompson.
Councillor Thompson. Hi, thank you for that. We'd be lost without a substitute, so thank you for stepping up to the breach. Moving on, can we go to the minutes of the 8th of September, please? Which is on page number 7. And if I go through it in my usual way, page 7, there's never much on the first page, is there? Page 8. Page 9. And finally, page 10. Can we agree to that as a correct record? Those who were there? Yep. I see all around nods. Is there any matters arising from members? No. Well, in that case, may we move on to page 11 then? Agenda item 7, our only item on the agenda, which is a pre-app. Tim, do you want to say anything by way of introduction, or we can go straight to the developers?
Just briefly then, thank you, Chair. As members probably aware, this is a key site at the western gateway into the city centre, immediately to the west of Lisbon Street and the former international pool site, which is now on site. We've had some really productive meetings and discussions with the developers team over recent months, but I think now's the time's right to gauge and learn members' comments on the proposals, particularly in relation to the scale and layout of the scheme and the general setting of the proposals. Thank you. So shall I pass to Andy to... Please. Sorry, Adam's going to introduce the team. Thank you.
Hi, yes, I'm Adam Desborough from Glen Howes Architects. I'm here on behalf of the applicant.
Okay, Adam, when you're ready, please. Welcome to this afternoon's meeting. And as you know, you have 10 minutes. You're the only item on the agenda, so we might be a bit more flexible than that because members will want to gain as much information from this session as we can. So
yes.
Please don't worry too much if you're a couple of minutes over. Okay. So if you introduce your colleagues, if they come in, please, would they introduce themselves too? Thank you. When you're ready.
Of course. Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, so thanks so much for this opportunity to talk you through our scheme. As I said, I'm Adam Desborough from Glen Howes Architects, here on behalf of the applicant. So thanks so much. Yeah, we've got a fair few slides to get through. So I mean, I think I'll rattle through this and try and keep to the 10 minutes, but you know, we've got ample time after to come back to any of this if need be. So I think you'll all be familiar with the site, as Tim introduced, you know, a key site here at the western gateway of the city, sitting between Wellington Street and the A58. So, you know, for us, I think, you know, again, context has been introduced, but, you know, at the moment, it's a collection of low scale existing buildings, but, you know, really fundamental strategic position. And as has been pointed out, you know, this is certainly, you know, one piece of the jigsaw, you know, in a number of sites which are coming forward, the International Pool site and the Croppergate Skinnerskate stream scheme as well, which is currently in, you know, under decision. It's not on this slide as well, but also the Castle House and West One as well are very soon going to be on site. So, you know, real collection. And for us, you know, it's an opportunity to, you know, really, you know, bring all these collective developments together, really connect them, you know, through fantastic public spaces, improve permeability, and really, you know, together it's about creating, you know, a fantastic mixed use scheme. And then for us as well, you know, we'll happy to talk about architecture all day, but, you know, it's a collection of really distinctive buildings worthy of this important site. So again, as Tim said, you know, we've had many months of, you know, really useful meetings and workshops with the officers and the adjacent landowners. You know, we've been reviewing scale massing, design, and, you know, architecture and highways, you know, in lots of detail. And, you know, over the past 4 or 5 pre-apps, we've really refined and evolved the scheme. And, you know, today we're just going to present, you know, what we think is, you know, fantastic and bold, ambitious vision for this part of the city. And the 3 buildings we're talking about in a bit more detail today is 2 office buildings and a residential building as well. But most importantly, I think it's fair to say, you know, a new green space and fantastic landscape scheme, which kind of ties this all together. So yeah, that connectivity, you know, bringing on all the adjacent sites, Pool site, West End Village, and Wellington Square below, and also to the north as well, to all the universities. You know, this kind of West End connectivity has been really important in kind of bringing together all these developments. Some in plan, fairly hard to see, but, you know, hopefully you can pick out the red line. You know, we're bringing very soon a full detailed application comprising the 3 buildings with associated public realm. And, you know, as part of that, you know, we think we've got a fantastic strategy for movement, which puts pedestrians first. You know, we do have to deal with servicing as well, but, you know, for us, trying to safeguard the activity around a new central space. All the red arrows you can see on screen are front doors. So, you know, it's trying to activate, you know, these new public spaces and routes with activity at ground floor. There is a basement car park coming forward as part of that, which will not only provide for EV vehicles, but also substantial number of cycle spaces. We've had extensive consultation with highways, and we think we've got a really great strategy which doesn't compromise on the kind of quality of the public realm, but allows, obviously, you know, these buildings to be serviced. And the public realm design, as well as a fantastic central space, which we'll talk about a bit more in a moment. Actually number 1 and 5 at the north and south, we're facilitating and upgrading existing and future routes as well for pedestrians and cyclists. So, the new space at the heart of the scheme, offers fantastic variety of spaces to sit, dwell, and will be surrounded by active frontage and lots of trees. This is a very generous space actually as well. So, very comparable to Sovereign Square and some other schemes which are, in the pipeline as well. So very generous space at the heart of the scheme. And just to take on a bit of a journey on new kind of arrival. So Wellington Street, we're looking to kind of upgrade Grove Street itself, which sits to the back of that, retain the existing trees and upgrade the landscape there, and provide a segregated cycle footway, as well as a new colonnade, which is double height and, provides activity and spill out directly onto Wellington Street. Just between the two buildings, you can just about see a new kind of dedicated cycle in, cycle out route as well between the two office buildings down to the basement. Main arrival from the city then will be, via Lisbon Street generally, and that will be surrounded by active frontages on the corner of the office building on the left and the residential building on the right. Again, with places to dwell and new greenery, and your arrival from the west on Cropper Gate, just starts to give you an idea of, the size of this new central space, the shared pedestrian priority route between, and you can just start to see the kind of proposals for the pool site just between the two buildings as well. So really green, active. And if you're coming in from the north on the future cycle route, then you'll be greeted with a lovely generous lawn space, with spill out for cafes as well at ground floor. And in terms of kind of some metrics for kind of doubling the number of the amount of green space on site, and 3.5 times the number of trees as well. So really significant approach in terms of the landscape. And for the buildings, with the 3 buildings, the idea here was to actually, for them to read as a family of buildings. So obviously very distinctive, but, the intent for softer corners and this horizontal language allows them to be really unified. And, we're looking at using a similar material palette as well. We've got some samples at the front as well. We're happy to spend some time afterwards discussing. But really the horizontal language of this building not only maximizes the panoramic views, whether you're working in one of the office buildings or living in one of the residential buildings, it helps to kind of enhance the light, hide away some of the clutter you get at low level actually, and really kind of maximize and balance from an energy point of view the light versus trying to mitigate overheating as well. And in terms of materials, we really wanted to work with a material which was obviously favourable in the city, but also something which gives us the opportunity to have texture and colour, and for us we've been exploring the use of glazed terracotta in different tones and textures, and we're looking at using various shades of red for the office buildings at the front and lighter shades of white contrast with some of the neighbouring developments. So the 2 office buildings at the front, so it's completely intentional that these are read as a pair of buildings, and the massing with the alternating steps and the terraces is kind of further offset by the different shades and gradients of the red terracotta, and the intent is that these can be fully used. Overall, probably up to 3,500 people could work across both these buildings. And, the intent is that these are the best in class, healthy, sustainable office buildings. And, they've been designed from the ground up to kind of, hit all those targets in terms of low embodied carbon from when it's built, through to kind of operational as well. And, aside from that, as mentioned before, extensive cycle facilities, and making sure we hit the kind of best in class kind of accreditation as well. And the terraces of these not only helps to kind of manage the scale, which steps up towards the scheme on the left, but also, these are fully kind of usable and green terraces as well, which offers some incredible workspace for the city, gives that true sense of kind of inside outside working. The residential buildings, so this isn't only unique in terms of the height of it. We think this could be the tallest building in Leeds once it's completed, but also the form as well. And you probably ask why hexagon? I mean, it's a pure form, but it was largely a result of a kind of a wider mass planning exercise in terms of street pattern. And then, the residual in terms of symmetrical form actually allows us to create a very efficient 360-degree building, which doesn't have a back to it. So everyone gets a fantastic view out when you live there. And this provides over 400 apartments, fantastic amenity space, which I've touched on in a moment. And, the idea with tall building of the scale, with the horizontal languages, really to kind of emphasize, the long distance views as well. And then the closer you get to this, you'll really start to appreciate the kind of design and detailing of this. And the lighter buildings then start to contrast with some of the office buildings and the scheme to the right as well. It's a very efficient building, and designed democratically around central core, generally 11 homes per floor, but you never access more than 4 of those off a corridor. And then goes without saying, all of these are designed to the space standards and housing standards as well. And like the offices, these designs will really be efficient, obviously operational, keeping bills down. So, using high efficiency systems, PVs, and providing, natural ventilation and extensive amenity spaces as well. And, these will all be designed for rental. So they'll come fully furnished and, will be incredibly high spec and offer fantastic views across the city, really made possible by those panoramic windows. The top floor, as mentioned, as well as the lower floors in terms of providing, fantastic amenity spaces for the residents in terms of gym. On the top of the building, we're looking to provide a fantastic sky lounge as well. So residents really benefit from those fantastic city views. And that's it for me. Hopefully that was just over 10 minutes. Appreciate that was fairly quick to go through, but happy to take any questions. We've also got a model, a scale model at the front as well, which we're happy to kind of spend some time discussing after. And we've got some material samples as well of the terracotta. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your time, Adam. Do you think it's necessary for members to have a look at the model? They could.
It's often
if
easier
anybody
to
wants to go have a look,
around, yeah.
please do so. We can have a couple of minutes recess. Can we come back to order, please? We're about to re-switch on the TV. Please, Adam, will you, Andy, when you're ready.
It's on now, actually.
Okay, we're on now. Okay. Thank you for that, Adam. I think the model was very useful. I certainly enjoyed looking at it. It gives you an idea of the scale and design in a closer up form than a picture. But I'm sure we'll have many comments from members. And with that, can I invite members to ask questions at this stage? Please show the usual way of hand. Peter, you're first.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of ones to start off with. We've got, I think there's a real positive with this design than what we had previously, that there's a lot of additional ways through the site, and rerouting the road, I think, is a positive to make that more of a continuous route. What we've had a lot of discussion on of the other sites nearby is the shared use and cycleway that goes alongside the A58 there. Just a bit of a touch on there about making it a welcoming space, I think. But when we looked at where your entrances were, you didn't have much around that side of the residential building. But I think that shared use cycleway around the edge would benefit from a lot of natural surveillance and a feeling of being safe. Otherwise, the work that you've put into it, I think, will be somewhat lost if people feel it's a bit of a danger for themselves to go through that way. So I wonder if you could touch on that and whether it's possible to make sure there is some active frontage on the other side of that residential building. The other point I wanted to come on to was just in terms of the design, really, and looking at what we've got so far on the CGIs. The office buildings I'm reasonably happy with, and I really like the look of those on the CGIs from ground floor as well. I think with the colonnades, that leads to a lot of extra space. You've got a lot of greenery and trees around there. But the residential building, I'm a bit concerned about, really. At close view, it's okay, but I just have, and I apologise that obviously my architectural knowledge isn't doesn't equal those who may have studied it in depth. But I think it might be the white appearance of it or others just makes me look at it like it's some kind of a bit of a dated look to it, and it does remind me of probably more exciting than some of the things we'd have built in the 70s from the hexagonal approach, but those kind of 1970s buildings which are now looking a bit tired. I think some of that might be in the colour that we see on the CGIs we've got, that it looks like that kind of off-white style that could be a concrete building if you looked at it, and there's not as much glazing as we saw in the previous ones. And I wonder if you could just talk through how that design's been come to, and whether there's anything we could do to improve the appearance of that building when you're looking at it from a distance as you come into Leeds, because these are important buildings on a main route into the city.
Thank you, Peter. Very useful. Beginning to our conversation. I'm sure we will explore that a bit more from members. I can tell you, Adam, on the site visit, that was one of the comments the visiting councillors made as well. I'm a bit unsure about it. I think in some ways, the white does show up very well, but I'll be certainly interested in your comments on it, and we'll see how we develop on that one. Okay, over to you, Adam.
Thanks very much. I'll respond to the query on landscape and the activity, then I'll pass over to Dav to respond on the Artesh. I think that's a fair point on, natural surveillance on the northern edge. I think it's something we'll certainly consider. There is the ability, certainly around the corner, to provide more glazing around there, to provide some activity. So that's something we'll certainly take away. And we'll probably need to, through the application, provide some additional detailing. So there'll be first floor where there'll be residential. So there'll be a bit of surveillance on there, but I think we could certainly do better at ground floor. So we'll certainly take that point away and review that.
Hi, Dav Bansal, partner at Glenhouse Architects. In terms of the language to the building, first and foremost, it is that pure hexagon form. And we were keen to ensure that from a distance, the graphics of this building are appreciated and you can read the hexagon form. So having that purity was to make sure we didn't then sort of plaster a lot of things onto it and that you read it. And as you get closer to the building, the detailing of the sort of metalwork on the sills, the sort of as you can see, the sample on there with terracotta having the sort of scalloped shape to it, the profile. And we're going to, we'll be testing the size of those scallops to sort of see at what distance do they start to be seen, closer or so on, but also then the glaze element. So what it will do, and it's very hard to sort of, I guess, capture this in images, is that it will have a sort of very interesting reflectivity to it. So as the sun moves around or as the sort of clouds in the sky, you'll start to get variety across that textured terracotta. And terracotta, I guess it's faience. It does have that sort of unflatness. It's got some interest to it. So we felt that we wanted to keep the language simple, but so they could be read from a distance. But as you got closer, the building got more and more interesting because you started to read the skin on the building. And I think the colour, there are already there's a big brick building on the Ridgeback site. Then you've also got some variety of buildings on the pool site. So we did test a number of variety in colours. It could have been red terracotta, but we felt that would probably get lost and diluted within the office buildings and the red buildings around it. So go for something that was light and tall meant that you sort of read the graphics, because the windows will always appear darker. They'll always, windows are always darker in the daylight. But so that being a dark band, if we could have the bands in white, you'd read the contrast of that black and white part of it. You mentioned about the glazing, and I think it's obviously important that we don't create departments that will overheat. That was one aspect of it that was important to make sure. We wanted to create a sill level so that any furniture, any back of TVs, and all that clutter that we all actually live in proper homes is not seen on the facade and compromises those buildings there. So that was all set at 800. We have got to cover the floor. So there's a sort of environmental aspect to it, but also a buildability aspect to it as well. But when you are at that sill level at 750, 800, it means that when you sit on your dining table or on your chair, you can still see out and you're not looking up at the sky. So, that proportion has been tested, and we feel what we've got now is the right proportion in terms of glazing and solid banding. Thank you.
Thank you for that explanation, Dev. Moving on, Councillor Walshaw, please.
Thanks, Chair. It's actually, to be honest, it was the same points as Councillor Carlisle's made. It's been covered in some detail, but there's an awful lot of good in this, and it is just what the outturn look of the building will look like. I think the hexagon shape is I agree, it's a good pure shape, and it would be a landmark building. And it's just the combination of the materials, the terracotta materials, and what will the glazing look like. In more detail, I think is what we need to see. But I do take your point about the sill height and about not looking up at the sky from various aspects, but then not having deeper windows, so you're seeing people's backs of TVs and things. I think that is a good architectural foundation, I think, for the start of a building. But just to wrap up, Chair, I think in terms of its approach to carbon and sustainability, I think it's excellent, and that's really good to see, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Neil. Any more questions? I haven't seen any hands. Perhaps I've missed them. Karen, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask what safety elements are incorporated, especially within the residential property. I wouldn't like to think that somebody who was on one of those really high, tall residential areas couldn't escape if there was a fire in there. So I'm just wondering what safety aspects have been incorporated and whether or not you've been in touch with West Yorkshire Fire Authority to check that anything would be safe, especially for families and young children.
Hi, it's Oliver Westray here, Development Director at McLaren. Yeah, very good point. And fire for us is, especially on a tall tower like this, is extremely important for us. So to answer your question, we've got a fire engineer on board. So the fire engineer from pretty much the concept design has been feeding in to ensure that the safety of residents is paramount. Following this meeting, we've already set up a meeting with the HSE, particularly around fire safety. And as per our previous schemes, we will sit down with the fire brigade as well to make sure that they're fully happy with it. But at the moment, we are as well as sustainability, fire is very much the forefront of our concept scheme.
Thank you. Can I invite Colin now, please?
Two or three points. Councillor Green and I were standing on the Wellington Street frontage of what's there at the moment, shouting at each other because they're not the traffic. And notwithstanding your colonnaded arcade, we did think that it might be useful to have a conversation with perhaps Metro and the City Council about that whole of that frontage area, because it's a fairly unpleasant environment at the moment. And I think we were of the opinion that if you perhaps move the footway back, the roadside footway back, and increase the planting, it might actually produce a nicer environment for people who are walking up and down. So I'd like you to have a comment on that or have a think about it. Can you just tell me actually how much space will there be between buildings A and B? We only say that because, again, on site today, the space between the existing buildings is a bit narrow and unpleasant, quite frankly. And so I think a wider space might be more appropriate. The other one is there's a reference to, on your slide, to electric heating via sustainable sources. I think the question we might ask is not so much where does the electricity come from, but these days about how much do you use? And so I think we'd be interested to know just how energy efficient the flats will be with regard to the ongoing increase in price of fuel and our desire to minimise or get down to nothing power use. I think the point about the detailing on the residential block, I'll make a comment on that later, but I think lots of people have touched on that.
In terms of the front of Wellington Street, I think it's important that we do maintain the building lines along the historic Wellington Street, and therefore the actual building front facade does sit in line with, I guess, the character of Wellington Street. But making a point about the landscaping, we've got a double height, generous colonnade on the ground floor of the building, which pushes that ground floor glazing back by 6 meters. Yeah, by 6 meters. So there's an additional 6 meters of public realm, and it's covered space as well. There is opportunities, obviously, for that colonnade to be landscaped, and there may be opportunities where people may even want to sit out onto that because of the south-facing aspect to it. But we feel like that allows for the breathing space on the ground floor, and having that covered colonnade gives it a certain civic presence onto Wellington Street as well. The gap between the buildings is ideally for bringing cycles into the development. So in respect, you've got the cores of the buildings being back to back. There is a 6 meter gap between the buildings, which allows for that sort of shaft of light. But more importantly, it's a way of cycling in and out of the building. So we thought it was important that rather than putting the cycle access somewhere else or, on the back of buildings, actually it should be at the front and the same elevation where you have people walking into the buildings. And it also connects onto the public cycleway as well. And there are, and as you can see, there's without going into too much detail, these buildings have been shaped very much around the huge constraints in terms of distances between buildings, also between, maintaining Copper Gate as an access into the development. So there's been a lot of sort of tweaking and churning in terms of the shapes of these buildings to get them to work efficiently.
I think the plan on screen shows it quite well. So I think just to add to what Dav said on the frontage, I think you're probably referring to the additional footway as well, which is immediately north of the road. So I mean, at the moment on the diagram on the screen, we're actually suggesting that people, walk through that generous colonnade rather than along the road. So if there is an opportunity to, change that footpath to additional landscape, that could be something we can explore if it's feasible. And then, I think Dav covered the gaps between the building is proposed to be 6 meters. I think at the moment the existing gap is very narrow. I think it's 2 meters we measured it at, so it's 3 times the width of that. And as Dav said, that very much serves as a route to the basement. And we could probably answer some on electricity as well, I think, together, Ollie. But I think, in terms of, making sure that all the systems are very energy efficient is at the forefront. So it's fully electric. Obviously, the grid is on, currently and continually being decarbonised. So, electricity is much greener and, is based on a lot more renewables than it used to be historically. And in terms of the ventilation system, whilst there is ability to open the windows, there is within each apartment heat recovery as well. So, it's very, very efficient to kind of run and heat these apartments. So I don't know if there's anything you want to add, Ollie.
It's just this is obviously going to be a build to rent scheme, so it's going to be managed, and obviously we know at the moment there's a cost of living crisis, dare I say, at the moment. So for our residents, saving their money and making sure the building's as efficient as possible is paramount. So, we'll very much invest in smart technology. This is going to be managed professionally on site. So everything we'll do will look to reduce our carbon footprint, but also look to reduce the bills and the cost of living for our residents.
Can we just explore how efficient? I know you talk about the grid being decarbonised, but if you're still using a lot of electricity, that's not much benefit to people who live there. I know we constantly talk about effectively costing nothing to run these places. Now that might be an aspiration too far, but I think, well, I won't ask you to answer the question now, but I think when you come back with the full planning permission, I think we'll want to know exactly how energy efficient these flats are. And in particular, what steps you're taking to ensure that they're future proof.
Yeah, that's very much noted. So we'll add a lot of context to your question, Councillor.
Thank you. Moving on. Can I have Paul, please?
Which I didn't think I would be so quick. The improvements to the highway, particularly on Wellington Street and the cycleway, are much needed, and other members have talked about that. So I guess you'll come back with detail of that, the full application. But my real comment is about the residential building and what you would technically call private outdoor space, or the old-fashioned balcony. Are there any? And where they are, I'm sure you don't want to hear my friend's story of 3 years ago when we couldn't mix, because you've all heard it before. But if you haven't, you can ask me later. But ultimately, a very small balcony 9 floors up can actually be a lifesaver if you're locked down for 6 months or so, shielding. I hope we never go back to that, but you've got to future-proof these things, haven't you?
Hi, yeah, thanks. I mean, good question. I mean, we appreciate the argument and the benefit of balconies. I think it was certainly something we discussed very early on. When we were kind of bringing the brief together for the scheme. I think from our kind of collective experience, they can sometimes be underutilized, particularly in taller buildings. I think people fearful of heights, windy conditions, we do often find they're underutilized. So I think, for us, we've really put a huge amount of effort into making sure we provide best in class communal facilities for everyone to access within the buildings. There is a dedicated private external terrace at first floor for residents, so everyone will have access to to a lower level sheltered outdoor space, and then, as some of the images showed, we're looking to provide some fantastic internal amenity space on the roof as well.
come back briefly, Chair. Private outdoor space is fine if you can mix, but when we're not able to mix or only mix in sixes or in tiers or whatever we might think about next time round, that won't necessarily be a big help to people who are locked down or shielding or anything else.
Look at as common, and certainly the applicants can give consideration to that before they come back. Caroline, Councillor Gruen, please.
Thank you, Chair. As I was saying when I was looking at the model over there, I do think the shape, the proportion, the massing and the way the buildings look at each other work well for me. I think it's a good structure for a city. And I do like the terracotta finish and the shading as it goes up. My thoughts about the residential building mirror those of my colleagues, I must say. I think the proportion of it is absolutely fine. And as I was saying to you privately, on the CGIs, it doesn't seem to work. But looking at the material, it might look different when in reality. The first observation I'd make about that cladding, or whatever you call it, is that the terracotta cladding, for example, on page 19, is textured in bigger segments and therefore more perceptible from the distance that the supposed camera is on here. Whereas the white one, it looks a bit more like corrugated iron because the sections are smaller. And I think we need to think about how it's going to look from a distance. My other thought was, when I looked at the materials, if they were glazed even more highly till they were shiny, would that not give it a more reflective modern feel? Because I share the view with my colleagues that this looks as if it needs more glazing somewhere. It doesn't look modern enough somehow. The proportion is absolutely fine, but I'm sure you'll see what I mean if you look at slide 19, that particularly the bottom base where there's a lot of that white cladding does look like corrugated iron from this CGI. And I think you need to think about how that works from a distance. I also feel that nowadays building any sort of apartment or flat without a balcony is backward looking. I think you should give some thought to that. I'm looking at the balustrades across the top of the patches of cladding on the residential and wondering if that couldn't be a sort of divided walkway or somewhere that people could come out of their apartment and be in the fresh air.
I think with the good point you made about the reflectivity, you know, we still need to test the sort of the profile of that terracotta. So, you know, and we said, as I said earlier, we will do that, and we'll test it from a number of distances to sort of see when do you start to see it. I guess the other thing is that each of those sort of profiles will create shadows. Shadows will slightly give it a slightly different variation, and that's what usually happens. And maybe a good thing to show some other buildings where we do have cladding like this, so you can actually see the real impact of it. I think that's important. In terms of glazing, the way terracotta's glazed, it's fired, so it has a sort of sheen to it. We want to give it a sheen rather than a glossiness to it. I think that's important. The other aspect also of making it more glossy or making it more reflective is firing it again and again. You know, as many times as we fire it, this has an impact on the sort of embodied carbon on the building as well. So yeah, absolutely right. We want to make it reflective, but we want to get the right level of reflectivity, and it doesn't feel too glossy, but more of a sophisticated sheen. And with balconies, I think especially with tall buildings, they are very much underutilized. They're very difficult, and I think being a very windy city compared to many other cities, it's also a real danger of having these balconies. And what they end up becoming then are winter gardens. They end up being enclosed as part of the facade in order to manage wind. And so in some way, what we want to do is be able to have these windows that can open above that safety level, above that 1100 safety level, and allow people to get good level of natural ventilation into their apartments. But again, being a build to rent model, it means that the level of amenities that is provided here compared to a conventional residential market sale building is far, far greater. I think it's about 3 square meters. Yeah, up to about 3.
Yeah, 3.
So just about 3 square meters of amenity per apartment. Whereas in the residential, you'd get a reception, a desk, and then a lift lobby. This has got plenty of amenities where people can work, spend time together. There's also spaces where they can be alone and also spaces where they can socialize and interact. So, this gives a range of different types of amenities for people to use, whether they're in a group or on their own. Thank you.
Thank you, Dav. Can I bring in Karen again, please?
Thank you, Chair. I do admire all the health and wellbeing facilities which are incorporated within the plans, but I think that one thing that's missing is a play area for young children, and I don't think there's enough of that within the development to accommodate for the number of children and young people that might be living in those apartments. So I just wondered if there was anything that you could maybe add or put somewhere, because the city centre always lacks play facilities for young children, so I would appreciate that. Thank you.
It's certainly something we can take away. In an early iteration, we had some small level of kind of informal play actually within that square. We've kind of redesigned it since around the kind of servicing and access strategy, but I think it's certainly something we'll take away and so we can get some kind of small level of play, which is probably appropriate to the size of the square and the city centre location. So yeah, good point. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Adam. Fine replacement for Councillor Garthwaite. I'm sure she would have raised that question. So well done. Moving on, Peter, please.
Thanks, Chair. I was just coming back to the same point around the design of the residential building, because I think that was really useful to give some context around, yeah, absolutely, that point around making sure the form is able to be you're able to see that hexagon shape from wherever you are. That's really, really useful. And it's useful to understand that bit around the sills. I'm just still not sure about it. And I wondered, Chair, whether it would be possible to get a comment from the design officer around what you think, because I know Stephen's never shy of letting me know when I'm wrong or when I haven't considered it. But I think that'd be really useful input to find out whether I'm barking up the wrong tree on this.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. You have to excuse me because hello.
He's just doing his introductory.
No. This is a difficult one because I hear and fully understand what members are saying, particularly about the residential units. But I have to acknowledge that the applicants have worked hard. And it's one of those awful ones, as I keep telling my colleagues in the service. And I'm not paraphrasing Star Wars. It's been around in architecture for a lot longer. You look for certainty. Do or do not. If you do it halfway, it's going to be a mess. So you're left with this white tower, which is classic modernism. It is classic modernism. It's going to end up nicknamed the wing nut, of course, the nut being a hexagon. But you can't, unfortunately, really. One of the things of modernism is the machine aesthetic. You can't water it down. You can't half do it. So the question is, you either do modernism or you don't. We would support this, and I think in the future, if members were minded to grant permission, I think we could look at the colour, and as has been intimated, the white's a bit stark. In the 1930s, the Delaware Pavilion and others, it was the colour. We can look at changing colour and varying things like that. I hear what I have to say, the applicants are right. Above 8 stories, a balcony is dangerous. Never mind putting it, I wouldn't step out on a balcony on these. So they've made an effort opening the windows and the form's pure. I'm recommending we're supporting and will be supporting this so far. It's one of those, and I think it'll do well for the city. Clean, sharp modernism. There's no messing about with it. That I will say that a strict modernist would not have rounded the corners. That will soften it tremendously. It will visually soften it, and a strict modernist would, you know, you get a member of the Corbusian Society, you go mad. You know, rounding the corners. What wasn't, you know, but they've, you know, it's as near and positive, I think, as we can. And if you're minded to support it when it comes back, I think ultimately it will be. I think you're right, though. I'll give in to the rightness. We need to talk about the colour. Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, you were absolutely right. At the bottom, it looks like it's, well, it looks like it's boarded up with colour. We can deal with that for you. We'll take it on. Anyway,
Stephen,
thank you, members.
just to keep you there for a minute, I was about to ask him to come in and comment as well, but thank you for doing that, Peter. It shows you that we both on the same lines, that we did need an expert opinion and a masterclass as usual from Stephen. I am concerned at the building. I'm not so concerned about the coloration. That can be sorted out one way or the other. And at the moment, I quite like the white, actually. It does stand out more. But that's just a difference of opinion and easily altered. But if we go back, Lewis, please, to slide 19. And I will be looking for a comment from you on this one, Stephen. It's the ground floor of the residential building. There doesn't seem to be enough glazing, and as Councillor Gruen said, it does give the distinct impression there is corrugated iron at the bottom. So I get a feeling, and I'm not an architect, but I'll value your opinion, but maybe we need to do more work at ground floor level on that one.
Thank you, Chair. I'll give you an opinion. You're absolutely right. And saying we can take the ground floor, we can do something. There's lots of things you could do with the ground floor, turn it into glazing with columns. Basically, in architectural terms, a solid void ratio. The solid ratio is far too high. But we can architecturally do. Fiddling with the bottom isn't messing the whole thing up. You with me? So we can take it back with the applicants. The applicants will no doubt have heard your comments, and we'll see what we can come up with. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those comments. I don't ask you to respond, just to take on board. You will remember when we had the other Councillor Groom, Peter, on here, he used to say very often that the higher the building goes, the better quality we expect at ground floor level. So maybe that's something to consider. Wise words then, and it certainly is wise word now. Well, would you not agree, Stephen? Keep him on the spot. Okay, can we move on then to comments, please? David and
thanks.
You've done you.
I've got to say, your comments about Delaware Pavilion, I never actually associated this development with the Delaware Pavilion, if anybody's been there, but I suppose colours the same. But I think that there is an issue with the colour, and there's certainly an issue with the bottom of the building. But in general, I've got to say, I welcome what's there. The office building looks really good as it changes, as it goes up, and I think that would be rather attractive. I think you've still got some work to do, but as I say, with materials on the housing part of the development, I think we need to see more of that. And I think what would be helpful, instead of having these sort of images, if we could have a walkthrough or something like that, if you could manage to do that, because I think that would give us a better impression overall. But generally speaking, I'm supportive.
Thank you, David. Dan, please.
Thank you, Chair. It must be quite frustrating for the marketing department who'll be looking to come up with a really funky name for this development, spending thousands. And of course, Mr. Varley's just named it the Wingnuts, and that is absolutely going to be what it's going to be referred to for time immemorial. You could save some money there. That is now what we're all going to refer to it. And I have to say, I think the Wingnut will be an ace addition to the Leeds skyline. I like it very, very much. I think personally, I'm not concerned about the colour. I think as you rightly say, as you approach, you'll get that texture and feel. I absolutely agree with Councillor Gruen. The bottom's awful and certainly needs opening up far more. But I think it's a great development. I'm delighted to see it's coming along, and long live the Wingnut.
We've had a succession of new words, the Wingnuts and the Delaware Pavilion. We haven't got a clue what that means, Stephen. We just had a conversation at the top. Could you explain it to us, please?
Sorry, because I think I was going to say, Councillor, in architectural terms, this has a very strong whiff of Art Deco about it, particularly the offices. And the Delaware is a well-known Art Deco stroke modernist, and it is pitch white. Morecambe, if I think I'm right, I can't remember myself.
Bexhill-on-Sea.
Bexhill-on-Sea, thank you, Councillor, you're right, yeah.
Thank you for that explanation. We don't like to leave any gaps. I like to understand everything. Is there any more comments? I haven't seen hands. Colin?
I don't think I would have said Art Deco, but there we are. Well, yeah, I would have been wrong. Yeah, I've been told off. Actually, my initial reaction was not so much a Wingnut, more of a humbug because of the black and white stripes. But what the heck? I think you've got the general impression that I think we're quite happy with the principle of a building of this size and shape, I suppose. But we'd like to get it just right because it is a key building on the entrance into the city. So we need to get it right. So that needs a bit of a tweak. And I think probably you're about there with the stuff onto Wellington Street. I would raise though, and I will continue to raise it. You spent the first half of the presentation telling us how fantastic the green space is, but actually, if we're brutally honest, there's almost no green space whatsoever. If you have 400 plus apartments in this block, we're talking about 600 plus people. And I say this every time, if it was a nice, hot, sunny July day, where would you go? And it seems to me not unreasonable that the people who live in that block should be able to go and sit out somewhere far enough away from the roar of the inner ring road to be comfortable. And I suppose the same is true for the people who work in the office. So at lunchtime, you might want to take your sandwiches outside. Okay, they do have a few balconies, but I do think that the green space is inadequate. I think you need to look at the layout of the site again to see if you can get more on there, because quite frankly, with a modern twist, it's really not, there really isn't enough green space on that site for the amount of development you're putting in there. And I think we've got to accept that we need that sort of green space within the city centre. So that's my big concern about the whole thing, Chair.
Thank you for that, Colin. Please, Councillor Thompson.
Thank you. Yes, just to echo what Councillor Campbell said there about the green space, to make sure we maximise it, make it that it is maximised and made to work as well as possible. Really pleased to see the active travel measures encouraging and prioritising cyclists and pedestrians, and that cars will be shoved well out of sight. Also, really appreciate the use of the terracotta mirroring what Leeds has done for such a long time. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin.
Sorry, Chair, I've just remembered something else. You mentioned this is a build to let. I would just remind you that we have a policy in relation to affordable housing. And I'd love you to take that into account before you come back with a full application.
Thank you for that, Colin. Paul?
Just very quickly, because Councillor Renshaw mentioned it about the park. I think you should do think about that, because you've actually got the 2 and 3 bedrooms right here, looking at it, but you haven't got the amenity for the park. And although we're getting a bee's knees park, I believe, at some point in time, I'm led to believe a long way away across the city centre. So you need to look at the park in with the green space.
Q, all useful comments for developers to take on board. Can we move on then? We have a couple of questions. If we move on to item 7, there's 2 questions that planning officers would like us to answer. And the first one is, subject to further analysis of key views, do members support the proposed massing and design of the building? I think that's a general yes, isn't it? Hell yes. Okay, and the next one, do members consider that the emerging approach to landscaping is acceptable? Well, you've already commented on that, so that can't be a definitive yes. We ask you to look at that again. That's a no, is it? Well, it's a work in progress. Let's not be too negative. They've heard what we said, and when we have a planning application, we'll consider it very carefully. And it might be useful to know there are other developments that will be constructed in that area, and they will also provide public open space. And it might be worth looking at the whole, so that we get the whole picture rather than one segment of it. David is nodding, so I'm sure that will happen.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to city centre living and working, it's about the combination of public spaces. And, with Wellington Place, the canal, with the poolside, this is, they've all got a sort of contribution to the public realm. So I think that it's important that we consider the entire sort of context. And there are parks nearby. So again, making sure that people have a variety of choices to sort of enjoy. And that is part of an urban grain in the city centre living aspect. But, we will take it away, and we'll obviously, just more work to be done on the development of landscaping. Thank you.
Thank you, Dav. Yeah, exactly what I thought. It'd be good to see the whole picture and it is public open space. None of it is restricted, so people can move around. Okay, then I think we've got, sorry, who am I looking at? Karen, sorry, I didn't see you, Karen.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to comment on what you've said about urban spaces within the city centre. And if there are other developments going to be applying within the city centre, then surely we need to ensure that within this one, for a starter, there's going to be adequate play areas for the families that are here, because we'll need adequate play areas within the other ones as well. So I'd just like to make it, specifically with it being in the city centre, because I think they do lack play facilities and areas of open space for young people. Thank you.
Just to add to that, because Councillor Renshaw did make that point earlier in the meeting about play areas, but you said young children.
Yeah.
And I think if we could think about across the age group rather than just young, because you often hear older ones saying there's nothing for us.
Mm-hmm.
Especially teenagers.
Yeah, I know you've got teenagers. Yes, I know. That was very useful, and I think there's a lot of thoughts there too for the developers to take back. So thank you for that presentation. It was an excellent presentation, and I think all the model was very useful. Members did enjoy it and walked around and give us a sense of how it fitted in. And I have to say, first presentation, you presented, in my opinion anyway, and I can't speak for everybody, an excellent scheme. I was really very pleased when I had my chair's brief some weeks ago when I saw it. But there are, tweaks here and there, and I'm sure you're aware of them as we are. And we look forward to coming back in near to that form, only much improved. And do please take on board the idea of public open space that's available for children and some children and young people that there are facilities available that they can use. It'd be very useful for the families, and it is going to be 10% 3 bedrooms, so there's likely to be families moving in there, and we would like to see that. So thank you and good afternoon. It only reminds me to tell you that the next meeting will be on Thursday, the 3rd of November. I hope to see you all then. And I hope substitutes have enjoyed it. I'm sure you both have, actually. Well, that's good. That's good. I like to keep a bit of humour in it out. Thank you.